Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Expert. Let's start with our coffee roundtable. Rachel, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Cafe Ibis.
Okay.
Out of Salt Lake City.
How is it?
It's excellent.
Okay. Clinton, how about you?
I think it's from Colombia. It's from the roaster I share space with, Typico Coffee Roasters. It was the bin that was open.
Matt, how about you?
I'm drinking Ethiopia from Heart Coffee Roasters this morning.
And Mark, how about you?
I've got my local Parisi Brothers, or Parisi coffee from the Oaxaca region of Mexico.
We're getting more specific about regions. I'm going to start getting like the farm I'm drinking my coffee from. I am drinking, still stuck on that bag of Campfire blend from Mighty Good, which is actually quite tasty. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Ask the Expert. Our subject today is Preventative Maintenance 101. My name is Highland Joseph, and I'll be your moderator. Today, our presenter will be Mark Roby. We will present and then allow up to 30 minutes for question and answer, and we will provide listeners with contact info if you have further questions or comments. And at the end of this presentation, there will be an email for you to reach out to for a copy of the deck and several examples of PM worksheets. The Ask the Expert series is for everybody. We're committed to presenting these episodes throughout the year. If you have suggestions for episodes you'd like to see, please reach out to us. We're planning season 3 right now. Let's get started. So, disclaimers, the presentation is for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in this webcast are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any aspect of the Specialty Coffee Association or the companies the panelists may represent. I said that all in one sentence in one breath. Our panel today is Mark Roby from Espresso Tech, Matt Martin from Vixo, Clinton Hodnett from Connected Coffee Solutions, and Rachel Dickinson from La Marzocco. Let's do a quick round of introductions. Matt, let's start with you.
Yeah, my name is Matt. I work with Vixo, so we handle a lot of different manufacturers across North America with servicing. I've been in coffee for about 12 years or so in various forms.
Rachel?
I'm Rachel Dickinson. I'm with La Marzocco USA. I've been also in coffee since 2001 in various forms and a technician since 2006.
Mark?
I'm Mark. I own Espresso Tech Service Company. We're based out of Kansas, but we're 11 states strong, and I entered this business way back in 1994, so I've got y'all beat.
Oh, dear God. actually, you don't have me beat. I entered it in '87.
You win.
I've been in this business for so long. I used to work in coffee shops that actually used piston machines. Clinton, how about you?
I am Clinton Hodnett. I am Connected Coffee Solutions owner and the only guy running around. I've been in coffee almost a decade now, and just the last 4 or 5 years started using a wrench.
Okay. Excellent. Let's get started. Mark?
Okay, so we're going to talk about preventive maintenance today, but we're going to segue quickly to a story that Rachel has, which really, at the end of all this is the reason why we do preventive maintenance. So, Rachel, if you could just share that story of that one particular service vendor.
There's a gentleman in the state of Colorado who is semi-retired, and the only thing that he does is preventative maintenance. The only way he will onboard a customer is if they agree to preventative maintenance throughout the year. It's especially important since he has a lot of remote coffee shops that he does service. And within 1 year, because he did regular preventative maintenance on a schedule, he only had 1 reactive service call.
So that's pretty amazing. So that really is the whole entire summation of why preventive maintenance is so valuable to an end user on there. And although that's an interesting situation that he has the opportunity to do that, if we could get all customers on a preventive maintenance program, clearly the numbers would show that it would be a valuable service to them. So essentially, what is preventive maintenance? It's a routine scheduled service on a piece of equipment, and it includes the changing of parts that do normal wear and tear, gaskets, seals, springs, things of that nature, and also things that have a specific lifespan. Say it be a pressure control valve that that we have determined needs to be cycled out every 12 months. It's a great opportunity to inspect the machine when you're there, to see any issues that may be going on. Say we have a small leak on a threaded connection on there, we can quickly tackle that instead of that allowing to exacerbate and cause additional problems down the road if it had been ignored. And you wouldn't be able to see that unless you were actually in the machine looking at that, which preventive maintenance provides a great opportunity for that. It's also a wonderful opportunity to capture data. Many manufacturers require certain amounts of information when they want to warranty parts. Preventive maintenance is a critical part of that, as well as things like water quality. I mean, that's probably the most obvious thing that we would capture is how is the water quality going to the machine, because that seems to be probably the number one issue, at least from my standpoint, the number one issue of where we have problems with machines on there. It's a wonderful opportunity to form that relationship or that bond with the customer on there. The more times you're in there, the more you can educate them, the more you can be their true partner instead of somebody they just pay. You're somebody that has a vested interest in them, because if we could all just do preventive maintenance all the time, that's routine service, it's routine income for us. On a Saturday night, I don't think anybody likes to go out and clean up a mess that's occurred probably due to lack of preventive maintenance. But at the end of the day, it really is designed, as Rachel pointed out with that particular vendor, it's really designed to lower the cost to the customer. In other words, perhaps they may pay, the same cost throughout an entire year, but it's in smaller integral amounts, and it's we don't have that catastrophic event that really results in a machine that can no longer generate income for them. And if that machine can't generate income, not only do they have to pay for the service call, which is going to be expensive, but then they also have the added benefit of the lost revenue. So it's sort of a double whammy for them. Can we go to the next screen, Highland?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, so what's in a preventive maintenance kit? A lot of times manufacturers will come up with their own, and that's incredible. I mean, it's good for me. I really like that you can just buy a package on there, and they do a good job on there, and it for the most part includes everything that they want to have in there. However, if you have a particular client, perhaps they have multiple locations or just one, you can tailor your PM kit to anything you want. I mean, ultimately, you're in charge of outside of a manufacturer requirement, you're available to develop any kind of PM kit that you would like, tailored to that client. So maybe somebody uses their machine more in one location and less than the other. Perhaps their frequency could be less, or certain parts could be delayed. But again, you can tailor that. However, you just need to make sure that, and we all will do this, make sure that we're doing it to the best interest of the customer. So we're not going to sell them a lot of extra parts that they don't particularly need, or try to get them to get us in there more often so that we can be the person benefiting from the revenue stream. It really needs to benefit that. And that really goes back to that whole relationship thing where we need to develop a partnership with our customer. And the kits are, again, based on longevity, on need. And then the one thing I keep forgetting is safety. I mean, there is a safety aspect to this. Some parts do need to be changed because there is a safety aspect to it, whether it can be a small event or a catastrophic event. And it does happen. And so when we're out selling those kinds of programs, that's probably, for me, that's probably the one I miss the most. I talk about, use and wearability and keeping your machine up. I tend to always forget about the safety aspect, which is probably the most important reason for some of the PM parts that we change out. Does anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got a question. And the safety aspect is a really good point, Mark. I've never thought about that. What I'd like to hear from all four of you on it, and we'll start with Rachel, is what goes into planning a PM kit? Because like the example I use, and I had this yesterday, my tech looked at the kit and was like, what the hell's all these parts for? I mean, again, we've all said it's like, has anybody seen one of the major manufacturers' kit, that 5-pound spread wrapped in plastic shoes up? So when you're planning out a kit, and even at a singular level plan, what I'd like to know is what goes into planning a kit and why. And let's start with you, Rachel.
The first thing is an expectation of lifespan or wear and tear. That's particularly evident with a steam valve rebuild. O-rings deteriorate under heat and also with usage. Different parts have different lifespans. So that's the primary reason for the preventative maintenance kits, is specific lifespan and wear and tear just from generalized use. There's also, based on data collected from the field, there may be an addition to an initial preventative maintenance expectation. And I do want to add to the safety aspect of it, something like a PRV, a pressure relief valve for the steam boiler. That is extremely important, because if that fails, that literally can be a catastrophic failure. Either if it releases, or an example in England, the PRV failed in a closed position and the pressure caused the boiler to implode and kill somebody. England is the only country that requires a PRV in any type of boiler situation, at least at minimum be tested every year, and you have to be certified to do that test.
Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I don't think there's much else for me to add. Rachel did a great job of explaining kind of how these are put together and what it's based off of, and just making sure there's no downtime. And she's exactly right. Studying wear and tear and longevity of parts. Manufacturers usually have a lot of study built into all of this before they roll a unit out, and so they have a good understanding of the typical lifespan of each part, and safety again comes up again. So wonderful.
So Clinton, an additional question to you is, when you get PM kits, you make sure you use all the parts, right? And Mark, I'm going to ask you the same question. Because time and time again, when I worked with some techs, it's like, I'm going to use what I think is right.
And
it's a big question, I know.
Yeah, no, there's like 3 answers that I've got to it. As far as using the parts that are like, I think I need to, I use all of them. And I had a great experience recently with a client where I changed out their gaskets, and the baristas and I had a lot of fun, like finding like description words that we normally use for coffee to talk about using the machine. And we were like, the gaskets were crunchy and now they're juicy. And it made me think for a minute, and it's not that there's a dichotomy between the machine and this component is broken, the machine is working. There are levels of the joy of working with a machine where the gaskets are like really fresh, or like just seasoned in enough that they feel really good. And if you are like, no, that can go a little longer, that part's going to tread into this is no longer fun to work with territory before your next PM visit. The one thing I will say, I have some clients where they've got the machine up against a wall for some reason, and they just don't use one of the steam arms. So sometimes that ends up stretching a little bit longer, because I need to make sure that that's still sealing and not leaking ever. But if they're not wearing on it, there's way less wear on that, and I'm going to have to work on that arm considerably less than the arm that they're actually actuating. So I have to adjust for that a little bit from where a manufacturer's kit might have kind of assumptions that I'm using both at once, as I would like them to. But I definitely don't like risk it.
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. Mark, how about you?
Yeah. I think sometimes you do, like you had talked about, Thailand, you get a big box of parts and you're like, what the heck? And as Matt said, and Rachel as well, there's a lot of information that comes back on determining why you need to replace those parts. And just because perhaps we don't feel like that part needs to be replaced, a pressure relief valve is probably one example. I mean, I have time and time again on a smaller, like individual customer who, that part may be, I can't remember, let's say it's $50 or whatever. They don't want to pay that. And they're quick to tell you that they've had the same pressure relief valve on their hot water tank since 1904. and it works just fine. Well, it doesn't. But there's reasons for that. I think what we more find is that some of the routine scheduled maintenance that we get, and again, on maybe more of a corporate type environment, the problem is not too many parts. It's sometimes we feel there's a lack of parts. So there might be a few things that we kind of scratch our head and say, why wouldn't you replace this when you're in there? But at the end of the day, we're not perfect. We have head techs come back with some parts, and that's an interesting conversation that we ultimately have to have with them, and then we send them back out to go ahead and replace those parts. But it's and again, like Clinton said, sometimes it's you're not using a wand as often, or the other aspect you get is that the machine is scrunched in and it's hard to get to. Like, you have to take the side panels off, but you got a piece of equipment on each side, and sometimes techs can be like, what, I'm just not going to do that. It's too much work. And those things happen, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's important to stress, and we do. And it's nice when you get a package with all the parts in it, so that you're not having to scramble to try to figure out what it is, or you've got just a big bag of parts. Matt's manufacturer, they do a really good job putting it in a big plastic container and kind of highlights everywhere it goes to make it as easy as possible for you to do that. And those kind of kits really work out well.
Yeah, and I think
go, Matt.
I think it's going to be different per client and per unit too. And I know that we had previously discussed a little bit, and probably we'll discuss a little bit more on this whole idea of like understanding your unit, or I think as Rachel put it, like having a relationship with your unit. So like the more that you understand it, kind of like what Clinton was mentioning, like you understand exactly what's going on. Each environment's gonna be a little different, from Mark, where he's mentioning, to like a large corporate environment that I kind of hang out in, to a smaller store that maybe there's a specific wear and tear that you are aware of, or maybe you recently did a rebuild on something maybe a couple weeks ago before the timeline hit when you're supposed to do your PM, and you know very well exactly what's going on. Now, each client's gonna have a different expectation. Like a giant corporate setting might have a different expectation as well, compared to maybe a small mom and pop shop that's in your backyard. So I think knowing your client and knowing your machine, I think, is also a key factor in understanding that question. It's a great question, Highland.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I manage several big PM projects annually, and I have to admit that for several years I got to the point where I said, you need to put all the parts you used back in a kit and send them back to me, because it's trusting, because ultimately the customer's paying for all those parts to be replaced, and the company's putting it out. It's not your decision as a tech to decide whether you're putting the parts in or not. It's kind of a little heavy on a decision, but I feel like you're being employed to actually replace everything, and you need to replace everything, or clearly document why you feel like you're not, like in Clinton's situation. Let's move on to the next slide, Mark.
All right, so how often do we do preventive maintenance? Again, this is an arbitrary number. Sometimes it's determined by the manufacturer. Sometimes, as Matt said, for the mom and pop, it really just depends on their need and your relationship with them, and what you all know about the machine. But typically it would be quarterly, bi-yearly, or yearly. My personal opinion, I love monthly. I would like to stretch out the entire PM into small monthly visits. Again, in my opinion, the more times you can look at the machine, the more times you can catch little bitty things that are going on before they become larger problems on there. Manufacturers, for the most part, require PMs during warranty. So if you do the installation and you're the vendor for the warranty period on there, they'll determine what that will be and what parts will go on in there, and they'll actually pay you for it. So that's a pretty good gig. It can be based on sales volume. In some super automatic machines, it can be based on time or shot count, and that is it's a different way to do it. And sometimes it's shot count and time. So if you don't get to that certain shot time, that shot count or usage amount, then you go off the time factor on there. I think personally that if you schedule it more on a time basis, that's a little bit easier to control. And it also, again, gets you into that machine at certain intervals where we can capture that data and send it to the manufacturer, and keep it for us so we can see what's going on. But at the end of the day, minus a corporate client, minus a warranty period, if this is your client, you can tailor it to them, as Matt said. I mean, it really is. You can make it as specific as you want, and you will get to know that customer and know what's best for them. And again, it's not our position to oversell them to generate income just for us. It's to develop this partnership so that their machine works long and that they're happy with us. We have a good partnership, and then ultimately that relates to translates into referrals for us for more business down the road.
So Rachel brings up an issue she brought up during our meetings about getting the customer on board with doing a preventative maintenance kit on a specific timeline. How do you guys? Let's start with you, Matt, because you tend to do a deal on a lot. What's your best advice when you're working with a tech on trying to get a customer to really understand the importance of the PM on these bases?
For me, it's a little bit different because like I think the understanding of the importance comes from a time perspective, and I think that's where a lot of the challenges come from our technicians, is that a lot of people have a hard time understanding why the time needs to be spent to do this specific thing, because we work in very high-paced environments at times. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us, is like being able to correlate to the customer. This is why we're doing this, and yet being able to work around them in a way that makes sense for them as well. So it's a big balance of being able to understand where they are on things, and maybe trying to figure out how that works within their time frame, but then also speaking to the fact that this needs to be done within a timely manner, just to make sure that there's enough uptime. But I would say time is a big thing for us.
Rachel?
With my thought that preventative maintenance is also an opportunity to stress to the customer that they actually are a part of preventative maintenance with daily cleaning. It's a great way to educate the customer on that. For example, daily cleaning, especially with grinders or with anything that touches coffee. If the customer is not doing their part, it's also going to incur reactive service calls or increase the amount of time a technician spends on preventative maintenance. Regular preventative maintenance also that very important feedback to the manufacturer. If you guys in the field are seeing a high number of failures of a part that's not in the preventative maintenance kit, that gives the factory an opportunity to review that part. Should it be included in the preventative maintenance kit going forward, or is there some design aspect that fails to meet the lifespan of that part?
Thank you. Mark?
Highland, what was your question again?
Talking about the advantages, getting your customer involved in the process. And we've all discussed it's about the customer not really wanting to spend the money. How do we do that? Not only the money or the time down.
Yeah, so that's that's my biggest challenge, and it has been for the last 25 years. It's to get people on board, and this would be smaller accounts. I mean, the larger chains, they have something already in place, so there's nothing to sell there. But it's the smaller ones that to try to do that, because they do watch every penny that goes through, and it is, can we shave some things off of that PM? And again, you can work with them as best you can, but I mean, I won't lie, it's a hard sell many times. I mean, they're happy to do the PM during the manufacture period when they don't have to pay for it, but then after that, it's hey, let's just see how it goes. And so I'll be interested on the discussion on some answers and insight, because it's something that I struggle with to try to convince them that this is a good program. And we can talk about downtime and loss of sales, and unless they experience it, then they don't. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. So it's a tough sell.
Clinton?
I mean, usually I'm able to kind of show the value, and I do a good amount of training like even barista skills training that I'll mix in with a PM visit, just because that's my background and I'm happy to toss that in. And frankly, good number of my clients need it. But I'm also not afraid, if I need to relate to lack of preventative maintenance that an unfortunate number of us are very familiar with. And I'll be like, when's the last time you changed the oil on your car? And I hate using this analogy because it's overused, but I use it because I have definitely watched that meter blink at me every time I turn the car on and been like, oh yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow. And I've had some very lovely repairs done to cars that really were just because I was too lazy to just spend that half an hour in the driveway and change my oil.
I would like to add to Mark's comment, the customer does pay for that initial PM. It is rolled into the price of the machine that they purchased. So they are still paying for it. It's just been rolled into the cost of the machine that they purchased.
My favorite example of the PMs, the importance of PM service is Paula Berman from Pacific Espresso. It compares it to a medical patient, where if you don't deal with your medical stuff right now, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse until you're dead. Now, it's actually it was an interesting concept in terms of managing your service like you manage a patient, because that data is really useful. The PM data is incredibly useful. That's we'll discuss it during our question and answer session. Mark, let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, so on the PM, it's half of it's doing the actual work and half of it's gathering the data, as Rachel said and as Matt has said. That's a really important part of it, because that stuff, that information will go back to the manufacturer, and it's also good for us as well to see what's going on with that. So it's nice to have that history of the current circumstances of the machine while we're doing the PM. Many manufacturers, I think probably all of them at this point, provide a preventive maintenance checklist. During the warranty period, that checklist would go back to the manufacturer on there so they can see what's going on and make sure that everything in the warranty period is being complied with. After the warranty period, Rachel and Matt can speak a little more to that. I'm not sure if the checklist would still go back to them, or we keep those. However, the checklist, even if you keep it, it's a great opportunity to build the history of the machine so we can see what's going on and reference, some kind of data as far as things that we see to personalize their PM programs. And obviously water, that's a big subject with it. It's a great time. We should always capture water quality because it does change. Water is a moving, living thing, and it changes from season to season in certain areas immensely. And there's no reason not to build in the water filtration. The water filtration is probably the easiest way, in my opinion, to sell the preventive maintenance, because you're already there doing the water filtration. And the water filtration, you can really put some fear in them, especially if you'll violate your warranty if we don't change this filter. That will usually get you in the door, and then from there you can continue to build on that relationship with them. But again, water is probably, for me, I think, one of the most important aspects that gets neglected over time and causes probably the most problems with espresso machine service. Any thoughts from the panel?
Well, actually, the question is, as long as I've been doing this, water is only recent in the last 5 to 6 years. On the manufacturer side, Rachel and Matt, why has it become such a key to service, but why has it become so important to preventative maintenance service? Matt, let's start with you.
And just to make sure I'm clear, why is water such a big part of preventative maintenance service?
Yeah.
Is that what your question is? Yeah, I think because what Mark was already talking about, the manufacturer has, in a lot of times, set a parameter for water quality, whether that's hardness or TDS, and they know that if it's going to go above those parameters, they know the impact that's going to happen to that unit. They know that it's going to shorten your time lines on all of your parts. They know it's going to potentially cause catastrophic damage to your components, and you don't want to mess around with water and electricity. That can do real funky things, and can't tell you how many times we've seen electrical components just go south real fast when there's a leak of some sort because of water quality. So that's huge. And I was going to echo that. What I'm also going to state too is whatever data you can have to give to the manufacturer is important. Whatever you're seeing on site, if you have the ability to add notes, if you have the ability to add photos, I know maybe not everyone has the ability to do that, but even just from a customer standpoint, being able to show them exactly what you're seeing in a physical sense really helps them understand why it's important as well. And I think that kind of goes along with this checklist of understanding, yeah, your water is huge, but being able to show and echo what's going on in the field will really help the manufacturer understand and your client understand as well.
Rachel?
Water quality across the world has deteriorated and changed over time. I know in the United States we've seen a lot of that, be it more TDS, more hardness in the water, which creates scale, which can significantly impact the performance of the machine, as well as more aggressive, potentially acidic water, which creates corrosion and cause a catastrophic failure with the boiler where you need to replace it. Typically, pinhole leaks in boilers are going to be created by poor water quality. There was something else I was going to add. Based on water quality data, the manufacturer may decide to change the materials used in the manufacturing process. For example, steel. A better type of steel can be used that's more corrosion resistance based on that water quality data feedback from the field.
Okay. Thank you. Mark and Clint, I have a little bit of a different question. How reactive, let's start with you, Mark, how reactive are your techs when they see that there's water issues that go above the specs?
Again, that's
water damage.
Yeah, well, we see water damage. We see it all over the place. It's our number one. I mean, that's probably the bane of all service calls. Is it's all ends up being related to water damage. Sometimes we're in control of that water process, and sometimes that's a different vendor setup for the water, and we can harp on it. But if I'm not in control of that water quality, there's really not much I can do for the customer except harp on them that needs to be addressed. But I would say probably 80% of our service calls, the reactive service calls, are related to some type of water quality issue.
Clinton?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot. The one thing that I would like to add here is that issues that come from water tend to kind of sneak up and then are suddenly there, like a clogged giggler or really anything along those lines. A barista doesn't tend to notice that the flow rate is decreasing by a few mils per second over time. They'll notice that their gasket's starting to get a little crunchy, but they won't catch that. And then suddenly it's a problem. And the thing that I try to stress with most of my clients is, especially with the water around here, which is very hard, once you go down the road of the water in your boiler is too hard, you're on that road. Like, we are going to battle that forever now, because I can disassemble your machine and strip it out and do my best for it. But at that point, there's a surface it's going to grip to, and that scale is going to come back even if we're on top of your filtration. So really being on top of it from the get-go and really measuring as often as I can to make sure that I know that that filter is still doing what it should is huge around here.
Thanks, Clinton. So we're going to kind of start our discussion points, you guys. And the first discussion is PMs from a tech standpoint and PMs from a customer standpoint. So Mark, why don't you go over those slides, and then we'll lead into those questions, those discussion points.
Gotcha. Well, from a technician standpoint, Clinton just laid it all out there for you. I mean, you know, nothing just happens. You've had an issue, rolling on, and so, they probably don't notice a few mils of water lacking on the output, but they notice if they put two portafilters in at the same time, and they're doing it based on timing, one runs 3 or 4 seconds longer. Well, there's a problem. I mean, it's not necessarily a problem, but there's an issue that's beginning to arise And so they knew that it was happening, but it didn't just happen. And so I always find those conversations funny because it's not true. And the more times you get in there, that is a conversation that I'm sure Clinton has had with them is, how's everything going? And then it may be an off the cuff of, well, actually one side runs 3 seconds longer. Well, Clinton already knows what that issue is, and you can go ahead and attack it right then, which is a much simpler process to clean out that area and get it back to where they like it. And then he's one step ahead of the whole process on there. So that's from a tech standpoint, that's one of the bigger things, is that you can address those problems early on. And it keeps the machine, as it says here, it keeps it healthy on there. But the other things for us, it's a revenue generator. So we would all like to be that customer that Rachel knows, or that vendor that Rachel knows that works 3 days a week. I would love to work 3 days a week. That would be awesome. And I would love to have one service call. And I hope that it would be in an area where then I could go ski the slopes. So that would be fantastic. It would be nice if we could all get there, but that's all preset work that he has established, so he doesn't have to worry about it on there. So for us, it's a revenue generator, but it is a set revenue stream. Now, from the customer standpoint, again, and this is if you can get them on board, and when you get them on board, you know, it really is, as Highlands put that in there, you know, we want to maximize uptime. In other words, your machine is like an employee. You know, it has cost you money, but it also needs to generate money from you. And, you know, like a delivery van, if that van isn't working, going back to Clinton's car analogy, you know, if your van isn't running, you can't make deliveries. If you can't make deliveries or deliver a product, you can't make any money. And so, you know, my guess is if all the Amazon trucks went down, Amazon would be in a pickle on there. So those items, people forget that they generate money. They just see them as an asset or a liability, when it really is a revenue generating stream for them, and it needs to be cared for.
Clinton?
I really can't think of anything to add there. That sums it up really beautifully.
It actually does. It's a tough one because, but I have an interesting perspective because I was a cafe manager and then a tech, and I always thought that PMs were the biggest waste of time. And then I was always really mad at my customer when my machine went down, and I would cancel the PMs for so it's as techs, because it's a difficulty because we're not, Clinton's in the field, the other three of us aren't really in the fields. How do we get our techs to alleviate that, because we're putting a big bullseye on their back? I mean, how do we get our techs to acknowledge that they're there to help the customer, and as most customers are, they're not there to like actually just take your money? Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, and
it's a hard question
because this is something that we run into a lot. And like I said earlier, like our technicians work in very fast-paced environments, and that might be a little different now in this time period, but things are starting to gradually change, and the pace is starting to pick up a little bit more. At the same time, like we've had to really coach our techs on how to just be understanding of their environments as well. And you know, for us, it's not a matter of if it's going to get done or not, and that's the difference, I think, between like a corporate setting and a local shop. Like, there's no doubt that it's going to happen, but for us, we need to be understanding of those environments, and we need to be able to talk to that and be understanding of that. And we've had to, you know, learn just how to work around that, and just be flexible, you know, to some extent. So. Yeah, at least that's from my perspective.
Thanks. Rachel, how about you?
I don't really have on this a lot to add to what's already been said. I do know, with being in after sales, helping cafe owners, baristas, and tech companies, that a lot of huge problems arise and require a lot of intensive teching and help from the manufacturer in order to resolve problems when preventative maintenance hasn't been done.
Okay, thank you. Mark, let's cover the last slide, then we'll go into Q&A and discussion.
Okay, I actually didn't know we were doing this last slide. I got to read it, Highland, sorry. if we That's why I start.
I felt it was important to include because I think the perspective from each side is important.
Right. So
And
the customer obviously, yeah. So the customer, and this is not all customers. I mean, I'm generalizing here, but customers do see it as a negative line on their profit loss instead of seeing it as a more proactive thing. Again, going back to Clinton's car thing, people don't change their oil until the bitter end because they don't see the value. People don't rotate their tires; they'll burn one of them off, and then they complain about their tires on there. And I will tell you that 60,000 mile tires will last 90,000. We have 22 vans, and we rotate them every 6,000 miles. Those things work. It's not free, but they work. And so it's hard to get a customer to understand that longevity of your machine and uptime, maximizing uptime. That it's not free. It does cost money, but it's less money than, again, if your machine is if your machine is down and you can't generate revenue with it, you are going to have the added expense of the repair. And then of course there's the customer aspect of it too. If they come in and your machine's broken, then you have an unhappy customer, and some customers take it in stride and some customers get pretty mad on there. Preventive maintenance, though, for us technicians, it's a wonderful tool to get a new tech started because it is very straightforward. Put this in slot A, put this in slot B, put all of it in there. Highland, it's a great opportunity that you had said to bring all of those parts back for a new technician. And then when you have the time on there, you can actually go through those parts and say, this is what happens when you leave a gasket in there too long, or after 3 months, this is what happens to a group gasket. Now here's a new one, and here's one that's 3 months old. Now, if we leave that in there for an extended time, it becomes a charcoal briquette on there, but this is why we do those. So that's a great opportunity for them to actually see the effects that happens. And so I like that idea of bringing it back. We do that to some extent. I usually just ask for certain parts back to look at, but based on this, we'll probably have a policy where we put everything back in the kit and I make them bring it back also to prove that they're, putting it in there.
Well, the other reason we bring it back is we recycle all the metal too, to be responsible. Because like we replaced, 400 steam valves on one job, and that's 400 pounds of brass that's recyclable. And it's a good program to have. It's hard to implement, but it is a good program to have. Okay, let's start questions. I have one question before we go to viewer questions. It kind of relates to the rise of barista culture, and I've had customers request and say, well, why can't we just do our PMs? But do you think the rise of the barista culture over the last 10 years, where we have more aware baristas, has been a benefit to service and a benefit to this kind of thing? Or do you find it's harder to work with because we have armchair technicians that we're dealing with? Clinton, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, to an extent, I started out as an armchair tech. Thank you very much.
That's me too. I mean,
no, I actually view PMs, like I'm psyched about PMs when the customer wants to schedule them when a barista who'd be interested is there, because it's a chance for me to explain how the machine works. And there are, like, as I learned how machines work, I looked back on my career as a barista and realized how many things I would have done differently. And how many times I would have spoken up sooner. I remember a shop I worked in had a 4-group machine, and I thought it was totally normal that I had to crank the portafilter in so hard that I actually moved that 4-group machine across the counter. And I'm tiny. Like, I moved the thing, and I thought that was normal. Thought that was, well, yeah, that just happened. I would really like to have a conversation with the in-house tech in retrospect about that. It varies, and I will, like the incident that Rachel mentioned where the machine exploded. I was always taught that that was actually a manager had seen a valve leaking and capped it themselves. And I share the story that way, that you don't mess with a thing that leaks, you call me. But a gasket, like, if you're doing them on a regular basis, you're probably not using a pick that's sharp enough, hard enough to hurt yourself. I want you to do your gaskets yourself. Like, I want you to feel empowered and know that that's how that can work. And I'll still come through, check your work, check your water. You'll still get your value out of what you're paying me. But your baristas are going to feel more empowered to actually take care of their machine and know their machine and how it can be, not just its weird quirks that they live with.
Thanks, Clinton. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
Um,
Uh-oh.
just to add to that, being able to, well, for one, an educated barista, you have the opportunity of a potential employee. There, you know, somebody not only knows coffee, but they're very interested and excited and in learning more about the technical aspect of their machine. They also are better able to communicate to a technician what's actually happening to the machine, what they're used to, and how they know that the machine is different and how is it different. So having that information can be extremely important in the technician to be able to narrow down what the actual problem is from the get-go, rather than having to not only translate what the barista or cafe owner is trying to communicate to them, but also stand there and try to let the machine communicate to the technician what is actually wrong with it.
Mark?
Those are my favorite people. Those are people that, you know, they're not, you know, they're not so arrogant that they're, you know, they make the best coffee and that's it. They are interested in the whole process. Like they're interested in the temperature of it and how is that and the internal workings, and they tend to be a little more mechanical as well. And we have 20 plus technicians. 10 of them came from that exact thing of they expressed, hey, I'm interested. Can I watch you over your shoulder? We're happy to take anybody as far down the road as they want to go. And like Rachel said, those are always potential employees. I don't necessarily try to steal employees from my customers, but if that's the path they want to go and they're willing to go down there, it really makes for a great technician, because they have the, in my opinion, technicians always 50% customer service, 50% tech. I can, for the most part, teach a tech if you're mechanical, but I cannot teach customer service. And unless you go into a really snarky coffee shop, most baristas are very adept at customer service and navigating the, well, let's just say your machine's broken and you got an angry customer. They're good at that on there. So they make a great technician, and they also understand the technician or they understand the customer from having worked in a coffee shop. And so I find that they can speak what I call coffee language on there. Like if they know they worked in a cafe, they're more in tune to listen to that. And then it makes that PM process, perhaps the selling of it, they're introducing the importance of it. It makes it more important because they were in the same trenches that the current owner is, that they worked at a bar and they worked on a machine and they saw the problems that happened. So I like it. As far as them doing preventive maintenance, that's probably the part that I don't like. I mean, I get that a customer can change their own gaskets and screens, you know, but like Clinton had talked before, you know, when you get that giggler gets clogged up, you know, overnight, which we know that doesn't happen, you miss that opportunity. So when they say, hey, I just want you to come out annually, you know, you miss several steps in there to get into to look around that machine. And that is unfortunate. And I get it that it's a time saving or it's a money saving aspect for the customer. And you do have a barista that's interested in tech, and that's great on there. It's just a fine line, and I've never really fully understood how to navigate that because I don't want to I don't want to, if I can save my customers some money, that's great. If I can have them change the gaskets, you know, that's good for their financial standpoint, but it is a missed opportunity for me to get in there. And so when you have a barista that is interested in tech, if you go that route, they may call you and say, hey, I changed the gaskets, but I noticed this was going on. Well, that's similar to having the opportunity to look at it. So I really feed onto those types of baristas that are interested in the tech, and we'll talk to them all day long, and we'll let them look over our shoulder and ask as many questions. You know, we try not to have the call extended out to incur additional costs to the customer for our time there. But typically we'll talk to them all day long and take them down as far as they want to go, and always keep them in mind as a potential employee. So I love those. Those are my favorite baristas.
Hey, Matt, before we go on to you, we've got some really good questions and comments. Are you guys good with going a few minutes over the end time at 9 o'clock to get everybody? Okay, there's just some good stuff. Before we start with you, Matt, Mike Wilkins makes an interesting point that good barista education on tech skills can also define the limits of what is safe for them to do and what we leave to trained professionals. Actually, that's a really, really good point. Matt, what are your thoughts? Then we'll go on to the viewer questions.
Yeah, I think everything that's been said is wonderful. And in being a tech, there's two different distinct sides of things. There's the person that when you walk in, they'll give you every single detail. Some of it might not be pertinent at all. Some of it might just be really random stuff. But there's the other person that will be just like, yeah, it's broke. I don't know. Something's wrong with it. It might give you completely different details. I would much rather have the person that's going to be willing to give you more data, more information, and be somebody that you can work with and coach than the other, because it really helps you in your job too. So the more that you can coach them, more that you can bring them along, it not only helps them in their understanding of how things works, and might even help them make better coffee, in all honesty, if they understand the functions of how things are supposed to be going. They keep things clean better, you know, so it not only helps you, but it also helps the company as well. I came from that vein where I was the barista that was curious about how everything functioned. I didn't know that I had the interest in becoming a technician really, or the aptitude to do that. I just wanted to know how it worked, and that inclination led from one thing to another. You know, I had good coaches, I had good mentors, and you know, I sit here because of exactly those technicians that were willing to spend time on me. So there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, this has been a really great discussion, you guys. I appreciate your participation. The first question comes from Robin Carmen. Regarding wear and tear, is it kosher to disconnect one steam wand if that one isn't being used often enough? What are the safety wear and tear issues that come with this? Rachel?
I think it's more from a water quality perspective, actually, because if you don't have water running through a group, if you aren't using a steam wand, when they decide to use it, it's going to have huge issues and may actually not even work. So in general, I don't think it's a best practice to completely not use something, because it's designed to have water go through it. It's designed to have steam go through it. So also you know, I have always, when I was a field technician, tried to educate and you know, switch steam wands, get even wear and tear, because yes, you don't use it now, but you don't know when you're going to need it based on customer need. So I would completely not recommend that, especially when it comes to electrical things. Disconnecting something doesn't necessarily mean that there's not electricity going to it, and that can create a huge safety issue.
Those are actually all excellent points. Matt?
Yeah, I was just going to echo the same thing, is that there's different parts that, for instance, O-rings, even in different parts of the unit, like if they're not constantly getting some kind of moisture, they'll dry out and crack on you. So it's like any other component in the machine, like Rachel was saying, if it's not getting that constant usage that's planned for, it actually might do the inverse and cause more issues. Like gaskets and portafilters, like if they're not being used and they're just sitting there and they're just exposed to heat over time, it's just going to get dry and crumbly, like Clinton was mentioning earlier.
Mark, how about you?
Well, I think that falls in your relationship with that customer on there. If they're not using one steam wand and they want to disable it or disconnect it on there, you know, there's a reason why. Obviously, the steam wand that's closest to the coffee grinder is the one they use all the time. We already know all this because they don't want to walk, you know, 6 inches to the other steam wand. I think that's an important conversation to have with them, again, as we're in there doing preventive maintenance, is to, you know, educate them on, hey, you have to use both steam wands equally. That, you know, a piece of equipment or a part is designed to be used, and if you don't use it, it doesn't work. And again, I love going back to the car thing, Clinton. You know, if you don't drive your car for a year, it's not going to start. I mean, you know, you can kind of get it back to going, but it's designed to be run, you know. So those parts need to go. And what Matt also said is that you can have the reverse effect. And then when we talked about, again, the part that I always forget, it's the safety issue. So let's say that seal does dry out or overheat because we don't have the even though the steam is hot, that may produce a cooling effect as well, more of a temperature stabilization on that. So let's say that thing cracks and then the steam wand doesn't shut off or it starts to leak on you. Well, if somebody grabs that steam wand pipe and it's an older version, it's pretty hot, you probably burn yourself. So now we're at a safety issue. So, I think that everything should be functional and working. And I think that it's more of an educational process at that point to say, let's not disable this. Let's figure out why you don't use it. And my suggestion would be to use it more, but let's not disable anything. And certainly with electrical, you never want to disable anything electrical on there, like, take the wires off a solenoid and tape them off, because it's just a recipe for disaster.
Okay. Clinton, how about you?
Yeah, echoing all of that, but I also have somebody that I end up working on machines after them once in a while, and I've found some solenoid caps just kind of floating in the bottom of the machine, and it's always at the client who like pours milk into the drip tray of the machine so their drip tray clogs. Well, you almost just flooded an electrical component that had active electricity going to it, and you have your machine on a metal table. That was almost real fun. So in those instances when I come around, I'm like, I'm going to reconnect this. It's going to hurt because it's going to take longer for me to get this back to life than it should have. It was really a 5-minute fix when they said, no, we'll just disconnect it. And that's been a huge thing around here is people don't want to spend the money to fix it. So they just stop using that part, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And then eventually I'm like, no, I have to take your whole machine because I can't safely remove this group, fix the issue, and replace it within any sane amount of time here on your bar. So after I get through that, I'm like, all right, let's figure out a plan. We're going to figure out a way to start using this side more. And I'll check it up and make sure that you're wearing on that. And I'm going to know because I'm here every 3 months, even less if possible. So, I mean, you can try to tell me that you've been back flushing and you've been using that group, but the fact that it's still as clean as the day I saw it and the other one's full of coffee oil tells me something else.
Those were all very good. Scott Crispo has a really good question, and I'm going to start with Rachel and Matt here because I run into this a lot. I have clients wanting me to work after hours for scheduled service. How would you guys discourage this? So my personal experience is I run a couple of large PM programs, and every time we call the store, can you come in after hours and do it and not downtime? How do we deal with that? That is tax. And from a manufacturer, large service company, how can we explain how important that is to the customer? Matt, let's start with you. Sorry to put you on the spot, dude.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's a relevant conversation though, because for us in my company, this is something that we're actively looking at, and I think it's tough because I think everybody has a different set of things that are going on in life, and from your technician's perspective, like they might have a lot of kids. I do, like I get that, and at the same time, like I think it really depends on your relationship with them. And as far as PMs go, like if they have a lot of traffic coming through and it's going to cost them a lot of money upon the cost of also doing the PM, like it's just compounded. And I can kind of understand why there would be an interest in doing after hours PM work, just because it's going to save you downtime in the store, and it kind of helps kind of recoup a little bit of that preventative maintenance cost. Now, I think that's really a relational decision that you have to make with your customer, and I can't pull a broad scope saying it's not good or it is good. I think it really depends on your customer base, and from a manufacturer standpoint, when I work with a corporation, like that's something that we are inspecting and that we are actively working with, and there's pros and cons to it, but I think from a local standpoint, I think you need to have a relational conversation with your customer.
Mark, what do you think?
We don't like to do after hours PMs like in the corporate environment. One, because Matt, the pay is the same. after hours, it's there's an extra cost to it. If you're already having a challenge with, some, getting them on board to pay, to do after hours, that it costs more money to do that. Now, on the flip side, I mean, if you're a technician who's young and single and just enjoys being a tech, after hours PMs are awesome because you got nobody in your way. You can spread everything out. You don't have to work around people. You don't have milk spilling all in your tool bag and cleaning it out later. I used to do them when I was tech and I had those customers because it was easier for me because I'd be scrambling all day, and then in my, I guess, downtime at night, I would happily do PMs because I wouldn't have anybody around, and it would ultimately take me less time. But again, it's like Matt said, it's a relationship issue on there, and if you can, I guess, pre-schedule those, you could do them, but I certainly think there's a money aspect to it. I don't think after hours should be the same amount of money because you are taking somebody away from their personal time. So I think it can be a slippery slope, but again, I think it's based on your relationship.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious, like, do you think that customers, Clinton and Mark, do you think that they would be willing to pay that so that they decrease downtime in their cafes, so they actually still kind of break a little bit more in the black in those instances? What are your thoughts on that?
Clinton, I'll let you go.
I haven't had a lot of trouble. Like, there are some folks that I've been flexible with. It's also right now, unfortunately, after hours is within my hours for a lot of my clients. Like, a lot of people, because it's so slow because of coronavirus, they're closing at 3. I'm like, yeah, I can come when you close your shop because I'm still in the middle of my workday at that point. I do have some folks who have tried to push me towards later at night. And one of the things that I'll kind of come back with is trying to find another way to make the dollar and cents work. Like, there are some folks that I talk to them and I was like, let's buy 2 new steam valve assemblies. It's going to be a little bit upfront for you, but then it's a matter of I rebuild those back at the shop, and then I just swap in the steam wand, and that just cuts the time in half or better that you're down during the day. We'll pick a time that is the slowest in your hours, but still within my hours. And I kind of try to find that compromise amount that says, I'm going to keep you down as little as possible. But at the end of the day, I am a small business owner who is learning to say no for the first time after that great period of never say no because you need all of the yeses. And I've just told people, I'm like, I do have a life at home. My husband has been very forgiving up to this point, and I can see his patience wearing thin, where, all right, no more 8 o'clock service calls. We're not doing that anymore.
Mark, what are your thoughts on that one?
So I like the idea of pre-assembling PM items on there to get it in. I found that in most cafes, 2 to 4 is a pretty slow period in general. This would be pre-COVID, and so I don't think there's been an issue with customers putting out there on social media, hey, on next Tuesday from 2 to 3:30 we're going to be closed for our annual PM. And I think in a sense that's a good way because it does actually show your customers that your equipment's being maintained, it's clean, you're trying to produce the best coffee you can. And I think with advance notice, I think that customer's okay with that. I think on the again on the after hours, like Clinton said, I mean, I had my days too, my years where I didn't say no. I took everything you could, and it's hard to say no because you're afraid you're going to lose that business, but you don't. You still get it. But again, we'd all like to get down to that 3-day work week and have everything on preventive maintenance there. But it's a challenging sell, but I try to avoid it at all costs after hours because my technicians, I only have 1-2 single people. The rest are all married and with children. They all have families, and so I try to be respectful of that as much as I can on there. And I feel like when I tell my customer that, they get it because they have a family too, and they work like a dog in their cafe, and so I think we can usually come to an agreement on we can pick an afternoon of their slowest day, and that tends to seem to work out pretty good. And we don't have a huge push on after hours. I think, especially now, because like Clinton said, that with COVID, everybody has such odd hours now that it's been pretty easy to get in and out. on there. On the flip side, on some of the more corporate things for the after hours or the later evenings, some of my techs do prefer that because of the COVID issue. It's less people to be around on there. So it's been okay for now. Once we're all in the clear, I don't know if they'll still want to do that on there. They may want to then be going home, but due to COVID, part of that sometimes has worked out for us to our advantage.
Okay. I'm going to do one more question after that, Rachel. No, I'm going to you. You're not. Don't worry. I'm not going to forget you. I'm just caveat. I'm going to do one more question after Rachel.
On that subject, the manufacturer has limited availability potentially. So if you're doing after hours work, you are not necessarily going to get the support that you might need from a manufacturer if you run into an issue that is beyond your current level of knowledge to take care of it at that time.
That actually goes to what I want to do with the next question, Rachel, and I'm going to start with you. Is one of the things you run into really commonly is additional service. Found on PMs is what we call them on my side. Rachel, as a manufacturer, in like in that first year of warranty, how do you guys handle found on PMs when they're like, well, we've discovered this additional work?
Do it. Essentially, if you find something, even if it's outside of the scope of preventative maintenance, that's part of your relationship with your customer. You are also, from a manufacturer's perspective, the representative of us in the field. So if you do the preventative maintenance and you walk away from that machine not working, not only might you're reflecting on yourself as a technician, but you are also reflecting on the brand of equipment that you are working on as well.
Now, and we're going to go to all four of you, but I have an add-on right now. As a manufacturer, if the unit is under warranty, will you cover that work?
Yes.
Okay.
Including parts that you find, but that is probably going to vary from manufacturer.
Matt?
Yeah, I would agree with what Rachel said. I think it depends on the manufacturer that you're working with. Every one of them has a little bit different of stipulation and timeline. But typically, I think that's the case.
Okay. Clinton?
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point now where I'm trying to build better systems as I look towards hiring, and something I've started to kind of explore and time myself on is if I find an O&D like that, I think I like found on PM a little better. It's easier to explain than O&D. But if I find something like that, I quickly evaluate, is this going to add more than 25% of the time I plan to be here? If it's under 25% of what I was already planning to be there, just do it, fold it in, it's fine. If it's a little more intense, then you have to step back, have a conversation with the customer and say, hey, this is going to potentially cost more, but I really want to make sure we handle it because here's where that road leads. And that's the biggest thing, is being aware that if you ignore a problem today, you're not getting to it tomorrow. I know you plan to make it back through between client 3 and 4, but it's just not going to happen.
Right. Mark?
I think it varies from your direct accounts to your corporate accounts. I mean, on some corporate accounts, when you find something, you have the opportunity to say there's additional work needed. They'll issue you a work order number and you get paid on it. There are times when you are on a PM and you try to be the good person and do the extra work, and the manufacturer, not Rachel's, will tell you that they're not going to pay for that you should have told them about it, and you were trying to be a good person and help out their customer, which is also your customer, and you sort of got nipped on it. So you really have to follow those, and those are always pretty well laid out on the corporate environment, that if you find something, this is what you do. And in some cases, you're not really allowed to do the work right then, it just really depends on the manufacturer and the PM structure that you have. For certainly an individual account, I don't think that that is a much easier process, because you can actually do the work. And like Clinton said, many times you're doing that on a time basis. And so if something's going to take you 2 minutes to resolve, you're not going to stick the customer with an hour bill. You're going to tell them, hey, by the way, I was in here, I found this other issue that's not PM related, but I've resolved it for you, and that's why you are on the PM program. If I would have missed that, it could have become a more catastrophic problem on there. I would be curious though, because I do want to ask Rachel on that. What if you are doing a PM and you find an issue, and let's say it is a water quality related problem, therefore technically not warranty? Like, how do you explain that to your customer, and how does your manufacturer deal with that?
For us, it starts a conversation around water. We're more liberal, I can say, about warrantying parts, and it allows us to enter that conversation around water and resolving water issues, and educating the customer on water. So down the line, they're hopefully not going to run into this issue again.
Okay, I have one more last question. Mark, did you have something to say before we move on to the next one?
Well, I was just going to say that, so for her manufacturer, I mean, to me, that's more long-term thinking. Like, you want to satisfy your customer instead of dinging them for, you know, a $45 part that you're going to say, now you violated your warranty. I mean, I like that aspect of it. When we sell equipment or people ask for referrals, I would tell you, it's, for me, it's the back-end support that really tells me which manufacturer to direct people to. And Rachel's manufacturer is one of those, just because of that aspect. If we do run into that issue, it's not going to be an immediate, you know, out of warranty, tell the customer they're SOL, and, you know, they got to pay for all this. They're willing to think long-term that, you know, they want this customer to like their brand. They want to work with their customer. There's a long-term thinking on there. And then ultimately that leads to referrals and more sales down the line. So when you look at manufacturers, I like that aspect of a manufacturer who's more proactive instead of stingent about things like that.
Okay, this is based on what Rachel said. I thought about this in terms of found on PMs, because I run into this a lot. Your tech was just here, and I'm going to use the auto metaphor that Clinton used, where you just had your oil changed, and you've been driving for about a day and your tires popped, and the customer takes the car back saying, I just had my oil changed and my tires popped. This is your fault. How do we handle that? It's really common. Like, again, I do 1,000 PMs a year. 20% of those within the first month are, your tech was just here. Let's start with you, Matt. How do you handle that when the customer comes back to you and questions that?
Yeah, and you know, that happens frequently, especially with units that have been in the field for a long period of time. You know, the longer you put them in the field, the longer those components start to just get worn out and stretched thin. And you put a new component on an old component, sometimes it doesn't always work well. And so, you know, the conversation that you have to have, and sometimes the customer still doesn't understand that. But as long as you're doing your due diligence and you're informing everybody as to what's going on, you know, we always ask our techs, you know, if you can, like, this goes back to the PM thing. If you can fix it during the PM and you recognize that the issue might be present, you know, then let's generate a work order and figure out how to make it long-term. And as long as you can relate it to something that's tangible to the customer, like, they'll understand that, especially if you start talking about their P&L and how that's going to impact their P&L, like, that's going to be just fine. But it's going to happen, and you just got to understand that, how to talk to those points and how to relate to the time and wear and tear. And I'd be curious to see, like, from all of your perspectives, is like, how often are you seeing that happening, and is it typically older units, and what kind of environments do you see that in? I'm kind of curious.
Rachel, let's go to you next.
It's a very difficult conversation to have, even with technicians, about, I did this, I did everything you said, but then a whole string of issues occurred from it. And it is, again, the systems age with each other. And once you put that new component in that's full of life, it's raring to go, that puts stress on a system that is aged with each other. So you quite possibly could see other failures just based along that. And one of my favorite things to tell people who it wasn't broke and now it's broke is, well, you gave yourself the answer. Something isn't broken until it is. So that's just part of life. The doctor analogy. I was perfectly healthy until I came and got this checkup. And now suddenly I have this other thing that wasn't there now. You have to treat it. It's there now. But I mean, older machines, yes, but also say a machine's like 3 years old even. Those systems have aged together. They know how to work with each other, even if they're not in tip-top shape. And then suddenly you put a new component in, and that puts stress potentially on an entire system because it's brand new.
Thank you. Mark?
I would say that's the worst phone call you can get. There's just no easy answer because from their standpoint, it's your fault. Like, I wish you'd never come in. You know, I was working fine. You came in to help me, and now it's a disaster. So those are really hard to figure out, as I'm sure Clinton will agree that as you develop this, you know, PM program, you will then notice that, hey, if I'm going to, you know, if I have a leaky pressure control valve or a leaky vacuum breaker that's been leaking for a while, I've never been up to full pressure on there. So if I change that and suddenly, like Rachel said, you're at full pressure, well, if something had been marginal because of age, well, if we're at full pressure now, that may go. You know, a pressure stat's a good example. You know, so you know, suddenly then that blows, or there was a crack in the line, which we had happen, and suddenly that thing blows apart, and they're like, "Well, you broke it." Well, I didn't break it. It was kind of already broken, but it wasn't allowed to break because you had this other problem. So, you know, but as you go through and develop those, then you start developing, you know, like Clinton has been talking about, you know, systems in place to say, hey, if I'm going to change parts A, B, I already know that C is going to be suspects, and I'm going to add that one in there. And you know, you try to do the best that you can do. You know, and we probably won't get to it, but I mean, I would be interested to see how many people, you know, are interested in going after preventive maintenance programs with machines that do have some age. Like we don't do it because I think it is that recipe for disaster of, hey, you know, I have a machine that's 5 years old. I take great care of it, which we know they don't. And, you know, the water quality's been fantastic and the filter's dated 2012. And so they want you to do a PM on it because they think it's going to give them more life. But as Rachel said, everything has aged together. So that not necessarily damage, it's just age. And so when you do that and you sell them on, I think that's where you kind of find those calls of, you know, hey, you signed me up for this. You told me this would be good for me. And now every time you come out, more stuff is broken. And so we don't really pursue preventive maintenance programs for those types of machines. I really only like to do it on a machine that's still under warranty. We sell it, and then we can continue on with that process. So I know where everything stands, as opposed to a machine that we don't know anything about. We tend to would get that call more, and it's a painful call and it's a painful conversation. We have eaten more money on trying to make them happy and trying to make it worth it, and it just ends up being a slippery slope. And I don't think anybody wins in those deals.
In that same vein, though, I think that there's a matter of trust and respect that comes with those conversations too. And I'd be curious to see, Clinton, like your experience from starting off and going through this process. Have you found that it's easier to have those conversations when they trust that you're being honest with your repairs, when you're being fully straightforward with them on things, than it is to maybe a new customer or somebody that has a lot of questions surrounding them?
I mean,
Go
something
ahead.
we talked about quite a bit in this that I just want to make sure we really hammer down, and it's a good time to do it. PMs are a chance for communication. They are a chance for you to communicate with the machine to communicate with you, and for the customer to be involved in that conversation as well. And that's a huge thing. Like I have too many customers because it's a small area. Everybody kind of trusts each other. I'll be left in the space alone. And I'm starting to put my foot down about that. No, you're going to stay here with me till the end of it, because we're going to go through the machine together. We're going to pull a shot. We're going to steam some milk. We're going to see that everything works together. So then if something happens after I'm gone, it's not that I left it broken. It's that something else has cropped up, and we'll engage that conversation as we go. But that's been a huge thing for me that I've learned the hard way by eating way too many dollars, has been, no, make sure you do a full test on the system. Everything is ready to go before you leave, and the customer sees that everything is ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to Mark's comment about older machines, I have, one of my customers has about 300 machines that are between 5 and 7 years old. So their entire PM list is based on testing systems, on making sure and going through and actually testing the pressure system. It's not parts oriented, it's testing the solenoid system, because one of the common things we see is we'll replace the solenoids, we'll replace the gasket, everything else, and then 2 days later the solenoids will fail. I've become a master of the email explaining how the solenoid doesn't actually fit into the PM kit, because as long as you're explaining to the customer how it systemically works, and your kits are testing the systems, not just addressing, like you're changing the vacuum breaker, but the vacuum breaker has a huge effect on 2 or 3 different systems. So what I found is the best way to do it, particularly with old machines, is you're going to get these calls. Rather than reacting to these calls, is empirically sit down and say, this is what we addressed on your PM, and this is why yours went wrong. I mean, I speak to something Rachel brought up at a meeting a while ago. We were actually discussing replacing capacitors on boards, and we all disagreed with it. And she explained why is that capacitor's aged as that board has aged. So you take that idea, that machine, that part in that machine is aged as that vacuum breaker is aged. So when you're putting new parts on there, you have to check the system to make sure it's actually working. And what I find working with contractors in Texas, the mentality is, let's just throw the part on there and walk away from it. Okay, you guys, that's the last question. I promise. Does anybody have anything to say before we wrap it up? Mark?
I mean, we all would love every customer to be on a PM program from the date of birth to the end of an equipment's life. It's not reality, but I think that hopefully this has helped some people perhaps learn how to educate the customers on the value of this and the value of a PM, because it is it's a great tool as far as just, again, being in there, like Clinton said, it's conversations with the equipment and with people, and it's building a great relationship and keeping your machine, giving it a long life and adding value to it.
Matt?
I think adding to just being relational, that's key, but also, take care of yourself too as a technician. Like, take an immense amount of notes, take pictures, take videos, whatever it is, to show this is my work, this is where we are. And I think going through that, I think you'll have a great relationship with your customer and an increased understanding of what's going on with the unit. So, yeah.
Rachel?
To expand on the data, especially from an after-sales perspective, it's really important to know if preventative maintenance has been done on a regular basis of a machine, especially with parts that fail from a water quality perspective, or being able to help technicians in the field narrow down quickly as possible what's going on with the machine and how they can get it fixed.
Thank you. Clinton?
Yeah, I often stress, especially to new customers, that my job is to make your job easier. Like, I want your experience with your customer to be a joyful one, and if your equipment isn't behaving as expected, that's something that gets in the way of you having a good experience. So the point of the PM is to make sure that that is as consistently wonderful and an extension of your being as possible. So it's worth that investment right out the gate to say, yeah, I love working on this machine because it behaves always at peak condition, because we keep it at peak condition.
Really, really great conversation, you guys. I was actually worried that we were going to bore the crap out of people, but you guys did a really, really great job. I want to thank you for participating today. For those of you who are watching, next week's episode will be Rich Leeson. Hopefully some of the, I think Clinton, you're on next week. We'll be discussing brewer and troubleshooting and some of the future stuff that we're seeing in brewers and technology. If you have any questions, reach out to us via the guild or my email. I will share the deck with you. You guys, thank you very much and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Laura, you can
Woohoo!
sign off. Thank you, Rachel. Laura, you can close it down. Let me see if I can shut it off.